Welcome to the Unlist. Today I'm taking a flashlight and shining it under a rock, and under that rock we find Liz Claiborne. Yes, not the woman Liz Claiborne, because she's been gone for some time and she's in a cemetery somewhere, but her brand is definitely under a rock now. And it's kind of unfortunate because for a while, Liz Claiborne was kind of like a 5.0 Mustang, a Fox body. It was cheap horsepower. It's going to give you results. It's going to smell good, get the job done, and be inexpensive. So it's a very dependable sort of go-to, no-nonsense brand for a lot of us who don't care about clout, don't care about prestige. We just want to smell good, man. That's all we care about. And it was a good brand for that. But, due to corporate mismanagement and the general state of businesses not knowing what to do when their business peaks and they begin to experience decline, they don't know how to control the fall. So instead of just kind of achieving a sort of market equilibrium with the environment around them, they just completely crash and burn and then go poof. And that's sort of what happened to this brand, unfortunately. So, Liz Claiborne, her real name is Anna Elizabeth Catherine Claiborne, or Anne Elizabeth Catherine Claiborne. And she is most known for her ready-to-wear clothing. She didn't really do couture, okay? She did all mix and match stuff. And she was one of the first designers to have her clothes all put into a single section. So instead of going to lingerie, going to jeans, tops, bottoms, there was a Liz Claiborne department that had all of her clothes that you could just shop her whole brand in and of itself. That was kind of cool. No one did that. Now all the brands do that. But, back then, no one was doing that but her. The fragrance came really late, though. So she retired in 1989. And her first fragrance came out in 86. And the thing is, a lot of her fragrances, the early ones were kind of quirky. They had quirky packaging. They had that typical 80s aesthetic to them because a lot of the 80s aesthetic came from Liz Claiborne. She was really into geometric shapes, bold colors. She used the primary color wheel for most of her stuff, so red, blue, yellow. And the first fragrance was a triangle that was either red, blue, or yellow, depending which one you bought. They all smelled the same, though. And then, after that, she had Realities, which didn't do so well, but it had a little stacked cube kind of shape to it. And then, of course, the men's version of Claiborne came out in 89, Claiborne for Men. That very bizarre fragrance that one is. The women's fragrance was actually fairly normal for the 80s. Your typical aldehyde, orange blossom, kind of thing. Chypre kind of thing. Nicholas Calderon made that. Good fragrance. But the men's version was a strange ozonic white floral chypre thing. So you had ozonic materials up top, very sharp, very acrid. Then you had some really strange white floral choices like cyclamen and freesia. Okay, what's cyclamen doing in a men's fragrance is really odd. But this was the late 80s. So you got to remember, late 80s, the Ghostbusters were crossing the streams, okay? So you had big rose fragrances for men. Anything goes. It didn't really matter. These days, all that stuff would be taboo. Guys want their shower gel, their bubble gum. They don't want to smell like cyclamen. But that fragrance has a dear place in my heart. And it's dirt cheap because nobody wants it. So if you want a weird white floral experience that's marketed to guys, then check you out some Claiborne for Men. Okay? It's not a bad fragrance if you've got an open mind. The big thing that really defined Liz Claiborne, though, after her retirement was the curve range. Yeah, the curve range. So, curve was kind of like the how to do it wrong in terms of having a blockbuster fragrance. And evidence to point towards that, you have to look at the other two watershed men's releases that came out the same year as Curve. So Curve, his and hers both launched simultaneously in 96. But on the men's market, Curve was joined by Acqua di Gio Porome and also Angel Men, later to be renamed Amen by Terry Mugler. Acqua di Gio Porome and Amen are to this day still both very iconic fragrances. Amen had a period where people thought it was being discontinued, and then it was brought back by L'Oreal. A little bit of a house change there, a little bit of a shuffle, but it's still available now. While Acqua di Gio has been going strong for 30 years plus and is still going strong, okay? So both those fragrances did it right, but Curve did it wrong. So what basically happened was Liz Claiborne wasn't expecting to have such a big seller on their hands, especially not the men's version. Women's version sold well. Men's version sold extremely well. You can't even buy women's version anymore. You can only buy the men's version. So it gives you an idea of how well it did. And when it came out in 96, every guy had to have it. Absolutely every guy had to have it. Their commercials were everywhere. And they called it all kinds of stuff. The commercials even called it liquid panty remover. That sounds ridiculous, I know. But they called it LPR, liquid panty remover, in the commercials. And, you know, nowadays we say stuff like panty dropper all the time, and it's not a big deal. But back in the 90s, when you called the fragrance, when the brand called the fragrance LPR, liquid panty remover, that was an invitation, really. That was an invitation to overspray the fragrance. You're telling all these young, horny guys between the ages of like 16 and 22 to take this fragrance and put 20 goddamn sprays of it on because they think it's going to get them laid, right? So they got to make a miasmic cloud of this fragrance because the more of it they spray, you know, the more pipe they're going to lay, right? That's just kind of how they felt. It doesn't work that way. It still doesn't work that way. If you don't have a good personality, if you're not smart and have some sense of hygiene, doesn't matter what your fragrance smells like, you're not going to get anyone's attention aside from maybe the police. So, but that's what happened. And then to make things even more funny is, whereas the other brands, right, whereas Acqua di Gio, Giorgio Armani, stayed in department stores, stayed relatively exclusive. I mean, yeah, discounters have it and stuff, you know, get it for less money. But the perception of the fragrance was still high class. Claiborne decided that it wasn't enough to have it in Macy's. It wasn't enough to have it in Nordstrom. It wasn't enough to have it in Claiborne boutiques. No. They had to put it in every Walmart, every Kmart, every Target, every Bon-Ton, every Rite Aid, CVS, Walgreens, every place, every little corner or high street perfume shop. So Curve ended up at the grocery stores. Little cardboard displays on the end caps of the health and beauty aisle where you buy your shampoo. There was a display of Curve. So they just carpet bombed the entire market with this fragrance. And yeah, they made a deal with the devil at the crossroads. They sold their soul, and in return, they sold a shit ton of bottles. But most of those bottles were sold in the US because you can't play that game in Europe, okay? Europe, perfume culture is much more sacrosanct. It's much older too. So you can't release a fragrance and try and stuff it into every corner store, every mom and pop shop, everywhere, in every European city. They're going to tell you to get out of here. We don't want your stupid metal can Curve product. We don't want it. We got our own Acqua di Selvas and our own local, you know, drugstore brands. We don't want your stuff. That's why Estee Lauder never really did that well in Europe either, because Estee Lauder's business practices weren't really up to snuff for the European consumer. So by selling the soul to the crossroads devil, Liz Claiborne made sure that everyone in North America, Canada and Mexico included, Canada, US, Mexico, everyone in North America knew what Curve was and were sick to death of it, tired of it. But nobody anywhere else in the world knew anything about Curve. So they oversaturated their home market and then locked themselves out of the world at large. So Womp, 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 Crimea River, right? If they had just kept it in department stores, kept it in the higher end boutiques where, Acqua di Gio was being sold, who knows? Curve might still be as respected today as it was in the 90s, right? It could have been a different world. So what did Liz Claiborne do? Well, the DNA of Curve for Men, created by Jean-Claude Delville, very good perfumer, by the way. He doesn't get enough credit. But that Curve DNA, which did live on in other fragrances, Fierce Cologne by Abercrombie & Fitch, Mont Blanc Legend, Parfum de Marly Percival. Even high-end niche fragrances still sometimes take a little bit of the Curve DNA and stick it in there. So it's a very good, well-balanced, successful, sweet, fresh, clean, musky, very inviting smell. But the brand cachet was annihilated, destroyed. So the fragrance itself wasn't going to carry anymore because your name was now in the toilet. So what do? Okay, you release Claiborne Sport in 97. Which is basically like a flanker to Curve because it smells nothing like Claiborne for Men. But it's a Claiborne Sport fragrance that's just like a little bit lighter and fresher take on Curve. But it's not called Curve, right? So you can stick that one in department stores, and they did. Claiborne Sport was in Macy's, was in Nordstrom, was in all the more prestigious places, while Curve had gotten flushed down the toilet, within a year's time. It was now everywhere, all the basic places. The Claiborne Sport was more exclusive, more upmarket, but it just smelled like Curve, a little bit lighter. So, did that work? I don't know. I still see tons of that at discounters for like $10, so I guess it didn't work. Discounters still can't get rid of it. So then they tried the exercise again. They're like, okay, well, what if Curve but Sport didn't work? Now let's team up with the mall boutique, Lucky You brand jeans, right? They're still around. Let's hook up with Lucky You and let's release Lucky You for Men. There was a women's fragrance too, but the men's version was just Curve but green. So you had Curve but Sport, and then you have Curve but green. And this was not only a different fragrance, but also a different brand. So it was Lucky You for Men by Lucky Brand Jeans. The same perfumer, Jean-Claude Delville, created it. He also made the Claiborne Sport, by the way. He was signed on all three of those. So here he comes out with another mod, I'm assuming, of the Curve formula. But now it's got some sage in it, a little bit more vetiver, some punchy, like cystery-hexanol type green notes up top to give it a bit of a grassy feel. But it's just Curve. So same muskiness, cleanness that's in the base. It's just now it's a little bit greener. Honestly, it's got a bit of a rubbing alcohol smell in the opening that's kind of hard to look past, but once it dries down, it's pretty good. But the Lucky You, another fragrance that all of the kids who wanted to get some action, they'd buy the Lucky You because they took that name of Lucky You as, yeah, I'm going to get lucky tonight, boy. Watch, I'm going to get lucky. They spray it on, and then they go out, and then they come home empty-handed. Didn't get any action, man. This Lucky You stuff didn't work, so out the car window it goes. I had a friend who drove Pontiac Bonneville 2002, 2003, back when they were new, right? He had a Pontiac Bonneville, and he had in his center console, he had a bottle of Lucky You. It was like his secret weapon. He thought it was going to get him so much action. Didn't get him any action. But he thought it was going to. So then 2001, we get the Curve but Spicy, right? The Curve but Spicy. And that's this one, Mambo. So I want you to notice something. This is not my deep vintage bottle. I've got a deep vintage bottle at home. This is a newer bottle that I took with me. This, however, is from my deep vintage gift set. So I want you to notice how this shows Claiborne underneath Mambo right? If the camera's going to focus. Don't think it will. Doesn't like me. Are we going to focus? No, we're not, because you suck. You're a sucky camera. Okay, but you can kind of figure it says Claiborne there, right? Now you look at this more recent bottle of Mambo, right? And notice how it does not say Claiborne. My old bottle does say Claiborne. So that gives you an idea of just how far Claiborne had fallen, that around the time these bottles were getting made, and the same applies for Curve and all the other ones too. Bora Bora, which I'll talk about in a second, is they actually took the Claiborne names off the bottles to disassociate. To disassociate Claiborne from these fragrances, right? Like, no, we didn't make those. What are you talking about? That's somebody else, man. We didn't do that. It's like, how do you disown your own fragrance line? Like, what the hell? You're trying to walk that back. Like, no, we didn't put out Curve. We have no idea what you're talking about. So they did that. They took their name off the bottles. So one of the easiest ways to know a deep vintage bottle from a new bottle is the old bottle will still say Claiborne on it. The new bottle won't. So it's just Mambo. It's not Mambo by anybody. It's just Curve. It's just Bora Bora. It's not by anybody. It's the fragrance with no house. It's orphan. It's an orphan fragrance now. It's a houseless fragrance. Oh my Lord. So silly. So silly. So Mambo's got a fun story. Carlos Benet made this fragrance. The first time Jean-Claude Delville actually said, "No, I'm done." Still has the Curve DNA in it, though, that soapy, clean muskiness. But now we got spiciness up top. Cinnamon leaf is in this. Amber notes are in this. A more vivid lavender is in this. It's a very nice fragrance. This is kind of like, if you thought Curve was too young and too gooberish and you want a more mature fragrance, but you like the DNA, you like the Curve DNA, but you wish it was a bit more serious, you want a more serious version of Curve, this is it. This Mambo's got you covered. Spicy, clean, aromatic, wonderful in the cold, still clean, still fresh, you know, just a little warmer, a little nicer. However, the story is that if you're a Howard Stern fan, if you watch Howard Stern, Ronnie Scoresman Munns, I think. Yeah, Munns. Ronnie Scoresman Munns. He was the limo driver for Howard Stern. He used to have this obsession, just this sick, weird obsession with Mambo. He called it his Don Juan fragrance, and he would actually have so many bottles of Mambo that he would put them in the fridge. He needed his cold, fresh Mambo to spray on him. It's kind of weird. He would just go on and on about how great Mambo was. He would try to get Howard Stern to wear it all the time, too. So don't let that ruin it for you. It is actually a good fragrance. It's just not as good as Ronnie says it is, okay? Now, after that, Bora Bora would come out, which was an Olivier Polish fragrance. It's not so much on the Curve DNA. It's more of a sort of a Milsim Imperial meets a bit of like more standardized aquatic. It's kind of a bit of a bridge between MI and like Bleu de Chanel. And Jacques Polge would look at this fragrance and look at his own work for Subtil Pour Homme and kind of build out the prototype for what would become Bleu de Chanel in later years. I'll talk about that in another video. But Bora Bora is a good fragrance. It doesn't get appreciated as much as it should. But then we see 2003, or is it 2002, I think? I think it's 3. It could be 3. But we see the release of Spark by Liz Claiborne. Just the last like real Curve-ish kind of fragrance that wasn't Curve. So if Claiborne Sport was Curve but sporty, and Lucky You was Curve but green, Mambo was Curve but spicy, Bora Bora was Curve but aquatic, then Spark was Curve but gourmand. It had that same musk profile in the base, but then it had gourmand notes, boozy notes, spicy notes, cinnamon, amber, a really interesting like bourbon vanilla kind of feel to it. Really good fragrance, actually. Really, really good fragrance. Harry Fremont made this fragrance, and it's one of my favorites. But again, it does have that callback to Curve, which by that point in 2003, Curve was in the gutter. So again, a lot of folks bought that fragrance, and unless you were like blue collar, Baltimore County suburb trash like I was, you really weren't going to wear that. That wasn't something for you, but it was for me. It has a dear place in my heart. So then we get to realities. I said put a pin in that. Realities would be turned into its entire own brand. The last 2 years that Liz Claiborne was alive before she passed away in 2007, they would take the Realities name from the failed fragrance and they would relaunch it as a cosmetics line that was more upscale, trying to be a more refined, more of a Clinique kind of vibe. So to match the more Clinique vibe of the fragrances and cosmetics, they would go with more mature fragrance styles. Once again, like Mambo was more mature. So the men's version of Realities, which there wasn't one in the 80s. The original Liz Claiborne Realities didn't have a man's version, but the 2000s, when they relaunched the brand as its own brand, the men's version of Realities was actually really nice. It did have some of that Curve feeling to it because of course it did, right? Of course it did. But it had on top of that little Curve vibe, it had the tobacco feeling of like a Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme, but also a violet leaf. So if like Dolce & Gabbana Pour Homme from 94 had like a baby with Burberry Touch from like 99, the violet leaf, those two fragrances kind of came together, and then Curve was the best man that gave them the ring, then you'd have Realities for men. So it's a bit of a mashup, you know, but it's a fantastic mashup, and it's got the tobacco, the violet leaf, the rounded lavender, the bergamot, and that sweet, musky, little bit playful profile in the base that, again, is the last but final but not least callback to the Curve dynasty. Here's the funny thing was after Liz Claiborne passed away, the whole brand moved into administration and ended up being bought by Elizabeth Arden. So it went from one Elizabeth to another Elizabeth, but Elizabeth Arden would do what Liz Claiborne didn't have the courage to do. Liz Claiborne, the brand, made all of these fragrances that were not Curve, but they smelled like Curve, but they weren't Curve, right? So Elizabeth Arden just said, okay, you know what? What if actual flankers? What if actual flankers for Curve? It's just bonkers that we wouldn't see any Curve flankers until after Liz Claiborne literally came to an end. But under Elizabeth Arden, the Curve range would be divorced from Liz Claiborne, made its own brand, and then we'd see all kinds of Curve flankers come out. All the previous fragrances, including Mambo, should have been Curve flankers anyway. By rights, they smell like Curve flankers, so they should have been, but they weren't. But now we had actual flankers after it didn't matter anymore. It was like too little too late, but we got them. And then we got Curve Crush, Curve Wave, Curve Black, Curve this, Curve that. And yeah, they're still all being sold in discounters and they're still all dirt cheap and nobody wants them. But at least they exist, right guys? At least they exist. Well, there you guys have it. You know what happened to Liz Claiborne. It's a brand that kind of shot itself in the foot because it didn't really know what to do with its success. And we got a lot of good fragrances out of it. Clearly we got a lot of good fragrances out of it, but fragrances that don't command any respect, which is unfortunate. Although I don't need my fragrance to command respect in order for me to enjoy it. Just saying. This has been The Unlist, and thanks for watching.